So on Sunday, I talked about the story of Legion, this demon that we meet in Mark 5, and I talked about how I think this is an enacted parable. Jesus is showing us something not just about this specific demon, but about all the ways that we demonize each other. And I pointed to a lot of different examples for why. The fact that this man is separated by Jesus by layers and layers of social isolation. Public nakedness was shameful in Judaism. See the story of Noah. Interacting with blood made you ceremonially unclean. See Leviticus 15. Touching a tomb required you to go ritual cleansing. See Numbers 19. Socially, politically, religiously, ritually, this man represents the other. Them, whatever's not like us, the cast out ones to a T, like he's almost a caricature at this point, right? The fact that the demon is then sent into pigs, pigs that are unclean in the Jewish culture, living on formerly Jewish lands. Those pigs immediately run into the water, which Jesus has just demonstrated his mastery of on the boat ride over to this side of the lake. And the fact that this side of the lake is the region of the Gerasenes, possibly a play on words, meaning the cast out ones, but certainly the other side of the lake where the Gentiles live. All of that to me says that what Jesus is trying to do is say that there are forces in our world, demonic forces, if you will, that keep us separated from each other, and Jesus is interested in crossing all of those boundaries. Now, whether you think that means there really was a demon and Jesus uses that to enact this storytelling example to point us towards something bigger, or whether you think that this is just a metaphor for the way that Jesus relieves all the pressures that weigh down on us, I mean, that's for you to decide. But at the end of this, I made one other interesting parallel with the demon legion, because a legion is not just a word for many, it's a specific Roman term that referred to a specific number of soldiers that would take up space and occupy land for the Roman government. And just for fun, since we're here, anyone want to take a wild guess at the symbol for the 10th Roman legion Fretensis, the very legion that camped out on the Mount of Olives and conquered Jerusalem only a couple decades after Jesus' death, right around the time the Gospels are being written? Here's a hint. It was a wild boar. That's more than a hint, but still, it's true. And the question came back to me, well, how is Jesus, even if you think this is an enacted parable where Jesus is showing something about our world to us in this encounter, how is Jesus supposed to incorporate the imagery of the 10th Roman legion that doesn't even interact with Jerusalem until decades after he's dead? And I think there's two interesting ways we can think about this. First is, well, I mean, if we really believe that Jesus is the incarnate divine, the Son of God, it's not unrealistic to me to then jump to the conclusion that Jesus can have prophetic parables as well, that say something to the audience that is seeing it happen, that say something to the person who writes the story down decades later, and that takes on an increased, expanded meaning once history begins to unfold. I mean, we see Jesus on Palm Sunday talk about the coming destruction of Jerusalem. He says, the time was in front of you when peace was before you, but you've rejected that, and now terrible, warlike things are going to happen. So Jesus sees this all coming. He sees the tension building. He knows where violence leads, even when we think that violence is justified. So it's not a stretch for me at all to think that perhaps Jesus is enacting this story with future meaning in mind. The other option, though, is to talk about authorial intent, that the writer of Mark experiences the power of Jesus and the significance of Jesus in the world. He remembers or is past stories about Jesus as he walked through ancient Palestine. But then when he tells the story, and I'll use language here that might be a little uncomfortable, but he embellishes those stories in order to fully capture the meaning and the intent and the profound encounter that it was like to be with Jesus at the time. And it's very possible that some of those connections to things like the 10th Roman legion are added by the authors because they felt like that best captured the experience of meeting Jesus. And we actually talked about that earlier in this series. At the end of the Gospel of John, the writer says that Jesus did many other things. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. A little hyperbolic, but you get his point, right? He's saying, look, I had lots of content available to me, but I went through and I very consciously chose the stories and the teachings that I thought best captured the experience of Jesus. And I've curated that story for you. An example of this would be Matthew. Matthew likes to take Jesus' teachings and group them together. So you get the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. You get the Sermon by the Sea, slightly less well known, but still a clumping of Jesus' parables together in Matthew 13. That same material is spread out in different conversations at different points in the other Gospels. Well, to me, what we see is writers trying to capture the experience that they imagined people had of Jesus, and they did that in different ways. So Matthew takes loose teachings and combines them together into cohesive sermons. Luke likes to have Jesus teaching occasionally as he and his friends travel together. It's very possible that the writer of Mark is doing something similar, although maybe pushing the boundary a little bit more, where there's an encounter between Jesus and a distressed man, and this language of legion or many demons comes up, but Mark makes the explicit connection to the Roman Empire and the 10th Legion when he comes along and writes that story out. Regardless, though, whether you prefer to think of this as an enacted prophetic parable that would gather meaning that Jesus intended over time, or whether you think that the writers are adding to the story in order to communicate the power of meeting Jesus and hearing him teach, I still think if you're taking the story in Mark 5 seriously, you've got to pay attention to the layers of social isolation, to the politics that are embedded in this story. It is not just a simple random encounter between Jesus and a demon-possessed man. The way I said it in the sermon, this is not just a random porcine encounter either. This is a political allegory. It is an enacted parable. Hey, Jeremy here, and thank you for clicking through to watch that video. If you're intrigued by the work that we're doing here at Commons, you can, of course, hit subscribe to keep up to date with all of the content that we're posting here on YouTube. You can head to our website at commons.church, and you can find us on all of the socials at Commons Church. You can also join our Discord. There, the community is having all kinds of conversations about how we can encourage each other in the way of Jesus. Head to commons.church/Discord for the invite there. Also, leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you and all the ways that you are journeying on this path toward Jesus. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all the ways that you contribute to this conversation together. We'll see you soon.